This is a lovely sunny Sunday in my garden in April, and I'm going to show you a few of the things that I'm doing in it now. This is one of my favourite bits. It's the wildflower meadow, and I sowed it from seed about 20 odd years ago. Now, although it was done from seed, I like to add things every year. I like to keep it dynamic. Even if I didn't add things, it would change. The populations of different plants change quite radically. But I like these lovely Alexanders, beautiful umbelliferas, and they're such a fabulous plant. Tall, lime green, you can eat every part of it, including the roots, and the leaves taste like celery, and they add some height. And I just brought in a couple of plants, and they just slowly seeded, and I think they're fabulous. One of the things I really love now are the snake's head fritillary. Here it is, it's got this lovely checkered cap. And I always thought that these just grew in nice, lush, moist conditions, but I'm amazed how the clumps are spreading in this. I've also cheated a bit. I've got things like the tulips. I've got a mixed palette. They're actually a bargain lot at the end of the season of dark purples and pink tulips, so I just banged them in. And they won't spread. They will last maybe one, and then next year they come up and there'll be less of them. But they're lovely. There's just a bit of eye-popping colour to zoom it into life. I'm not purist. This is not just native. I'm adding other things as well. But if I enjoy it, the insects enjoy it, so much to the good. I'm now going to add some orchids. I've been trying to establish orchids before and I've not had much success. The common spotted orchid is the one I'm going for. And what I've done is I've grown it on in a pot where I can look after it and tend it for a couple of years, and I've got 2 tiny wee clumps, and I'm going to pop them in the ground. I'm going to guard them, and I'm going to water them and treat them with cotton wool, and that way I hope they'll seed and spread. And that's the beauty of a meadow. You can add other bits. Where I've got bald areas, I've put in things like the native violas. I'm going to add some anemones and bluebells. I've got them in the green. They're slow to establish, but once you get them going, they do really well. Now, my wildflower meadow has been looking good for about a month, and it's going to go on looking pretty good, I reckon, till about the end of May. And then after that, it looks a bit past it, and it looks a bit rough and ready. So what I did, because I know it looks messy at certain times of year, is I made it into small blocks. It's not a massive area anyway, but if you've got mown paths in between the blocks, it helps to keep it looking more presentable rather than just looking like a tired old hayfield. The crucial thing with a wildflower meadow is you really don't want to start it on rich soil. Now, we were lucky our soil is very poor brash, limestone, and there's not a lot of phosphate in it. If you're establishing a meadow on any size, you want to get a phosphate check, because if you've got high phosphate levels, no way are the wildflowers going to beat the competition of the grass. The grass will just compete and totally eradicate them. If you have got rich soil, and if the phosphate levels are high, then you need to strip off the topsoil and just sow the subsoil. You can add yellow rattle. This is a lovely little flower, and it parasitizes the grass. But although people think this is the really fantastic answer to all your problems if you've got fertile soil, it cannot really help that much if you've got a very fertile soil. It will do a bit to help, but not a lot. I have tried to establish it here and I haven't had much success, but I'll keep on trying, and one day it will. So it's a sort of thing you can play with, and it's the sort of thing that is dynamic, and it's lovely, and it's very good environmentally. I can hear bees buzzing all around me. When I sit out here in the evening, you hear the bats come swooping down and use the pollen, the nectar or whatever. So it is pretty rich, and it's beautiful. You might have seen the video I did a year ago about putting up the Polytunnel. I've now had 12 months of growing in this polytunnel, and it's my first spring. And I have to say, I do wonder why I didn't put one up before. The difference in growing vegetables and plants in this environment, slightly warmer, far less pest and disease, and just wonderful growing conditions. It is such a breeze. You can grow so much more, so much better. You normally get the hungry gap in the early spring in the UK, and there's really not much in your vegetable garden. But as you can see here, in April, we've got radishes, I've got spigarello, I've got red vein sole, I've got basil, loads of different lettuces, mange too, lovely little baby fennel. I sowed those in August. None of the books tell you that, but actually they're now beautiful for picking. And mixed leaves, broad beans, baby leeks, baby spinach, brassica plants, loads of parsley. The world's your oyster, really. You can grow just about anything. I have made 1 or 2 changes. I did have 2 shelves on the back wall, but the top one was just that bit too high to reach easily, and the bottom shelf didn't get enough light. So I've now binned the top shelf and I'm just using the bottom shelf, and I've got seedlings and young plants on it at the moment, cucumbers and things, which are already fruiting in April. And later on I'm going to put chilies and peppers and all sorts of things on it. It'll be well used. I'm also bringing in quite a few tubs, so I'll really maximise the space. But it's just a beautiful environment to work in. You don't get sunburn because it protects you from UV light, and it's just such a growing experience. And I'm sure as I get better at it, it can only get better. This is another of my favourite places in the garden, and a place I spend a fair bit of time. As you can see, I've got loads of plants germinating here. Now, my first top tip for a good greenhouse is a good thermometer. When you sow seeds, all seeds have critical temperatures at which they germinate quickest. The quickest a seed germinates, the healthier plant you get. So I've got my maximum and minimum thermometer there, and it has to be a reliable sort, and I reset it every day. And it's fascinating to see just how much it keeps the frost off. So when it's been something like -4 outside, it's actually surprisingly been 1 or 0.5 in here, which is pretty good. But with a lot of these things like my tomatoes and my aubergines, I need a bit of extra insurance, so I've got the fleece under the bench and I pop it on at night when it's going to be frosty. My number 2 tip is really the capillary matting. This is amazing stuff. It actually holds water, so I water the plants overhead with a can, and then the excess is soaken up by the capillary matting, and then it gives it off slowly. And it really does reduce the frequency that you have to water, so it saves on an awful lot of work. I don't know why everyone doesn't have this in their greenhouse. Capillary matting doesn't just mean that you need to water much less frequently because it holds it like a sponge, the water. It also completely changes the root distribution. If you see a pot that hasn't been grown on capillary matting, you get all the roots going to the outside of the pot and down to the bottom. When you see a pot that's been grown on capillary matting, the roots are much better distributed throughout the compost because they've got a steady supply of water for a much longer period. It's fantastic stuff, well worth investing in. My third tip are these cell trays. I sow everything into these cell trays, and that means that when I've got beds in the polytunnel or in the garden, I can just rip out the old crop. As soon as it comes out, in can go the new little plug trays. And I find it really successful because you can actually get lovely little plants, singly or little clumps of plants. They're lovely and warm. They drain freely. They've got big holes, huge holes in the bottom. So when you come to pull the plant out, you just push it up with your finger from below and you've got a beautiful little plug. So it just saves a lot of space in the greenhouse or outside. You've got the little plants. You don't have beds full of plants waiting to germinate. You rip out your old crop and you put straight in with your little plug plants. Obviously have to harden them off. They can't go from a greenhouse to outside straight away. You've got to give them a week to acclimatise, but they are magic. I inherited these from my mum. They are probably about 30 years old now, and some of them are going, and you can no longer buy them, but you can get plastic equivalents. When you water seedling trays, it's really important. Obviously, you want a nice fine rose on the end of your can, and you want a can ideally with quite a long spout so you can get to everything. And the holes in the rose need to be pointing upwards. And I always start off watering with the can to one side, and then when you've got a fine rose coming out, then I move it over the plants. And then when it gets towards the end and it starts to dribble and drop, you quickly move it off. You don't want big fat dribbles and droplets going onto these young seedlings. It will just disturb them. And good watering is really key. I will have a couple of cans of water in here, so it's warmed up. I'll leave them full of water, so when I come to use them the following morning, they are actually quite a bit warmer than if they just come straight from the mains. I've also got my Plumbago here. Now this is the one that everyone remarked about, the wonderful blue flowers that go on and on all summer. Now I leave some outside in a very sheltered space, and for the last couple of winters I've got away with it. They've survived. They are hardier than people think they are, but I've also got some inside, and these will shoot into life earlier than the ones outside, and as soon as they shoot into life, I'll take loads of cuttings from them. They'll root within a matter of weeks, and I'll have lovely little plants en masse, and I can just pop them out, give them to friends or whatever. I think it is one of the best flowers for summer colour that you can get, and I just love that brilliant blue and the mass of the brilliant blue. When we arrived here about 35 years ago, there were very few trees in the garden, so there were very few shady borders, and I love shady planting. Now I've got so much shade, I'm just going to have to lighten it up a bit. So I'm going to lift some of the canopies, cut some of these big branches out. And I've got this favourite tool here, which is like a pruner, and it just zips through these fatter branches, and it will go and do about 80 big branches before you have to recharge it. And because it's cordless, it's very light, and it's not actually a chainsaw. You have to wear gloves and goggles, but you don't need the full kit, and even I feel confident using this. Here I'm trying to create a sort of rose meadow, and I've got plants growing underneath the hazels, but the shade's just getting a bit too much. So I've been cutting these hazel down just to give more light, so the roses will flower more if they have more sunlight. And underneath I've got a mixed bag here. I've got this lovely purple-leaved honesty chedglow, which just seeds around. The Erythronium pagoda, real thugs. They look almost orchid-like, but they compete against the ivy and the comfrey. I'm amazed how stonking and tough they are. Then I've got ferns which will pop up here, hellebores, all sorts. It's a sort of gardening, this shade gardening, that you can do as little and as much as you like. And I just keep on planting new finds in amongst it. So you can see how this works. So I need to put on my goggles, mustn't forget. And then you just simply Now, I shouldn't really be cutting hazels at this time of year with the leaves out, or that's to say, if you want to use the poles and things like that, they will last much longer if the plant is dormant and you haven't got any leaves. But it doesn't actually hurt the plant to cut them now because it doesn't bleed, the sap doesn't come running out. I'm actually going to extend it on the other side of the hazels there and make a lovely rose meadow in that. A rose meadow with no grass, only plants underneath, but quite wild and shady looking. This is my magnolia, looking brilliant in flower. It's been in flower for a good 3 or 4 weeks now, and most magnolias do not like limey, poor soil. And we are on very limey, pH 8, poor soil. But this is Magnolia cross Lobneri, and I think it's amazing, partly because it grows in my nasty conditions, and partly because it's also very frost tolerant. Most magnolias have looked amazing this spring because it's been quite cool and they've come out and they've looked fabulous. But then we've had these hard frosts, and so very quickly their flowers look like sort of used tea bags hanging on the tree. Really not very pleasant. But this one seems to survive all that and still come out smiling, so I really, really like it. Apparently the pink form of this, which is Magnolia Proslobneri Leonard Messel, is even hardier still. So maybe that's one to go for if you're subject to frost. But I think it's a wonderful tree, and it is definitely one of the highlights in my garden at this time of year.